Welcome to Governing Ourselves, the Libertarian Atheist Podcast. I'm Adam.
And I'm Lisa, and we're here to talk about religion, politics, life, the universe, and everything in between.
So this week, folks, we're going to talk about the future of this podcast and what it is that we're hoping to do, what kind of feel we're going to have. So far, we've kind of got you caught up with our lives and kind of our reasoning behind making this, but we haven't really said what we're going to do too much. One of the things that we're going for here is sort of a book club feel, right? It's very easy once okay, let me say it this way. Libertarianism and atheism are sort of ideologies or even maybe a lack of ideology, where you're basically saying something to the effect of stop telling me what to do, right? And I think that there is this like knee-jerk reaction to just sort of be angry and to lash out at stuff, and that's part of the process, right? But our goal here is not to do that. What we're here to do is talk about that stage that occurs afterwards, that sort of now what moment.
Yeah, and both of us, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think both of us did go through an angry stage.
Sure.
We both grew up in the church. We both grew up being told that this is the way things are. This is what heaven is like. This is what God wants for all of us in our lives. This is our purpose. Right. And so when you leave the church, you leave those ideas behind. And you kind of have to just start figuring things out on your own, often for the first time. And, I went through an angry stage where I was angry because I felt like the more I learned about the church from outside sources, the more I felt like the church leaders were lying, like intentionally lying to people. And that infuriated me. It wasn't just that they got it wrong, it's that, no, this was intentional. And so that's where a lot of my anger came from. It took me probably a year to get through that stage. And now I'm in the learning stage. I want to learn more about what the world is actually like. And I did read a book that helped me a lot through that. And, Adam and I can talk about that later. And, one of the things that Adam and I want to do is just read through a bunch of books. Books that talk about religion, books that talk about politics, and we'd like to share what we've learned with you guys.
Indeed. And I think there's books that have influenced all of us. And what we think might be interesting is to kind of pick a book one at a time and go through it and to talk about it, maybe devote a few episodes to a given book, depending on how long it is. Mm-hmm. So that way you, the listener, can join in with us and be part of that discussion. Yeah. In addition, I think it'd be really interesting for you to voice your opinion as to what book you'd like to hear about next. So we have a list of things that we've gone through. There's a lot more stuff out there that we still need to do. It's a strange world being sort of curious about the world intellectually when you have grown up with an ideology that tells you what to think, and not to worry too much about a lot of things because God will take care of it, yep. Or the government will take care of it in
the end.
Right.
That too. Yeah.
So now that you're going, well, now I'm not so sure about all this stuff, you want to have some guidance as to where to go next.
If you want to read the books that we're going to be talking about, go for it. That'd be fantastic. There's a reason why we're reading the books that we're reading. But if you don't want to read along, that's perfectly fine too, because we're going to be talking about it, probably the next week or 2 weeks from when we announce it. We'll see. But yeah, we want to share what we've learned with you guys.
So I think we have decided what our first book is going to be. And it's a big one, but I think it's something very important for anyone who is in the atheist community. And that would be not the selfish gene, the God delusion. Yes.
Yep. Richard Dawkins, one of his other books.
Yes. But we may do the selfish gene.
I'd be
at some
interested in
point.
that, actually. Yeah.
What's the other one? The Blind Watchmaker. He's got a
Oh,
few out there. And so
The one that I've already read is The God Delusion.
right.
And that is actually, that is the book when I first left the church, and I was trying to get through the anger phase. I was starting to want to just learn more. The God Delusion was recommended to me, and I read it, and it helped a lot. It really helped a lot, because I went through sort of feeling lost, like the church's point of view of the world and how it works and its purpose. There's a good chance none of that is true. And so, like, now what? What can I hold on to? What can I grasp and just kind of anchor me? And the God Delusion did it for me. There's a pretty decent amount of science in there, and I was surprised. But it gave me an excitement about science. Because in the church, the LDS church, and other Christian religions too, but in the LDS church, science is not looked upon as better than faith. Faith is definitely higher up on the priority list. And so to read about science, and especially how it related to things like morality, things like where we came from, it was fascinating to me. And so I'm very excited to talk about that more with you.
Yeah. I think one of the church leaders, I want to say it was Jeffrey Holland, even said that, and I'm going to mess up the quote, but basically that the study of the scriptures and of the gospel would do more to improve behavior than the study of behavior. And, so I think that's like a precious, not precious, like a perfect example of this sort of mentality I think that we grew up with. Right. It's like, you don't have to read Dawkins. You don't have to read Hitchens. You don't have to read Adam Smith. You could just read the Book of Mormon. You could just read the Bible. You could just read, the Quran if that's the thing that you're in, because that's
or the Ensign articles.
The Ensign.
The Ensign articles are expected to be, especially the General Conference talks, they're expected to be taken just as much of Scripture as the Scriptures, as the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Bible. General Conference talks are at that level. And that's how members are supposed to view them.
That's right. And another big chunk of those magazines is just faith-promoting rumors, right? Well, they're basically anecdotal stories of experiences that people can't explain, that, are supposed to essentially promote your faith, strengthen your testimony, that sort of thing. In fact, I think in chapter 3 of the God Delusion, he goes through Dawkins goes through just about every argument for the existence of God that there is. And it's really fascinating. And I think it'd be cool if we went through them one at a time. So we'll open up with the God Delusion. I think, maybe I'd like to do a thing where we stagger in something about politics or philosophy and then maybe back to religion. We don't necessarily have to do that 100%, but I want to make sure that we cover our bases.
Yes. So this podcast, we also want to cover current events. And so, I'm trying to keep up on current events in the LDS community.
Right.
The Latter-day Saint, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints community. Man, that's another one we're going to cover. They're going hard on making sure that the full name of the church is used all the time, and that is a pain in the butt.
It's a mouthful. And
there are articles I'm going to cover about that too, because not all members of the church agree with that.
We also need to keep our ear to the ground about sort of faith news in general. And then I'll be focusing probably more on political news. And that sort of thing. I don't want this to become yet another Trump-focused podcast. But the president is part of politics.
Yeah, but there's so much more to talk about besides him.
True.
We will cover him because he's relevant, whether or not we like him. But there's a lot out there, political stuff that we want to cover as well. So, yeah, we want this to be a lot about books and current events, religious and political.
Right.
That's what we'd like to focus on.
So, some other books that we're thinking about doing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you recently read The God Delusion.
Correct.
And you also recently read God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens.
Indeed. Also very good. When people really come at you with the argument of, where do your morals come from if not from God? You could almost answer with, well, I'm not sure, but they definitely don't come from God anyway, because he's a terrible example of morality. Mm-hmm. And God is Not Great is if you just want to hear every point ever to make about that, and it doesn't just focus on Christianity, it actually spends a lot of time talking about Islam and other faiths, and as to why God is actually not a place to get moral ideas from. But the God Delusion will explain where your morals indeed probably come from. Yeah. And the answer to pretty much every question is natural selection. Not to give away too much, but
it's Darwinian natural selection.
It is.
Yes.
So yes, these things are explainable. We'll get into them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's on the list of things to talk about. Yep. We already mentioned The Selfish Gene, again another Dawkins book, and the Blind Watchmaker.
Yep.
Okay.
There are a couple books that I've read as of still going on the religious thing.
Yeah.
One of the books that I've read it's called Misquoting Jesus.
Yeah.
And that one he's a biblical scholar, and he delves into the how the words and passages in the Bible have been changed over the centuries. And it's a pretty interesting book. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Another one is by a woman named Nani Darwish, and the book is called Wholly Different. And she grew up in Islam, and she moved to the United States, and there she converted to Christianity. And she wrote a book comparing the two religions and how Islam and Christianity are wholly different from each other. They are like night and day. You got a lot of, Islam apologists, I guess. The Mormons included. They say, look at the things we have in common. It's
right.
It's the same God, just different names. No.
It's not.
Not at all. And so it's a very interesting book. If you want to compare just how different Islam is from Christianity.
Yeah, it's pretty different.
It is. Another book that I read, I think I mentioned it in one of our previous podcasts. It's one of the books that led me to leaving the church. And that was, it's called, I don't have it right in front of me, Emma Hale Smith, A Mormon Enigma. Or maybe it was the other way around. A Mormon Enigma, Emma Hale Smith. Anyway, that one is specifically about Mormonism. And in fact, I think I did mention it before, because it's not as scholarly as I would have liked. It had a little too much of a narrative feel to it.
Sure.
However, some of the references that I looked up, they checked out. And it gave my doubts enough validity that I was like, you know what, maybe I'm not wrong in thinking the way that I thought, specifically about polygamy, but about other things too. Other things in the Doctrine and Covenants that didn't really make sense until the authors of that book brought it up and talked about it.
Boy, Emma had a life, didn't she?
Man, I would never want to be in her shoes. That poor woman.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, she went through a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
what are some other books that
don't run off from your dad, kids, It's like,
are you saying don't elope?
Yeah, don't elope.
Don't elope with a guy who claims to have seen an angel?
Yeah, probably a red flag.
Yeah, small red flag.
Small red flag.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what are some other books that you have on your list that you want to read or that you have recently read and you recommend?
Right. I recently finished Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. That's, if you want to be a libertarian, you need to know who Thomas Sowell is. You need to binge watch all of his YouTube videos because they're fantastic. Okay.
Nice.
This guy knows his shit. He will help you know your shit, and then you will have good shit. So definitely big fan of Thomas Sowell. Let's see. I did finish 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson.
I've read that too.
Yep, that's a good one. Has a lot of religious undertones in it, and I could see a lot of atheists going, "Why would you read that book?" Right? But listen, heed the words of Penn Jillette, right? Like, if you want to become a stronger atheist, read your Bible.
There you go.
And Jordan Peterson goes into to a lot of depth on biblical stories, their myths, their allegories, what they symbolize, and that's very interesting. And the rules themselves are quite interesting, and I think they're largely very good advice.
Well, and there was one in particular, I believe it was chapter 3 or chapter 4, where he basically rattles off a bunch of questions. And it's, even if you don't care to read his stuff, if you don't care about the book, at least read that section. I'll go through it and I'll find the specific page number. But he asks just a bunch of questions like, what do you want? What do you like? What do you value? All these different things. And you can really go through and just take time. Write down the question, answer each one of those things for yourself. It's a nice way to just like a personal evaluation.
Right.
So that's what I really liked about that book. We can talk about that more later.
I've been wanting to do his self-authoring program that he always talks about, and I haven't gotten around to doing it, but I want to know what it's about. So I'll probably try it.
Okay.
But let's see. So yeah. I think he's worth reading, and you should also binge watch all his videos as well.
I've watched quite a few.
Not all of them, because literally you'll run out of lifespan. But
he is all over the place right now.
He's all over the place. Okay. Let's see. I don't know if we want to read this one, but I thought we'd mentioned it. I did read The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. Yeah, no, you haven't heard of The Art of the Deal. Okay.
No.
Yeah. No, it's pretty bad, kids.
Like it's incorrect or just poorly written?
It's just
or the ideas contained inside of it are just bad ideas?
I mean, the title of it is obviously derived from The Art of War, right? The Art of War is an excellent read. For anyone,
have you read that one all the way through?
I'm about halfway through it, and I really like it a lot.
Okay.
But The Art of War is basically a series of proverbs, and just like bullet point advice, like never do this, always do this. One of the most famous pieces of information from it is all war is based on deception. Another one is know your enemy.
I've heard that one before.
These are things that are very applicable to various things in your life. Okay. The Art of the Deal is Donald Trump telling stories about how he made all of his money. And a lot of his deals have, interventions from like lawsuits in them and stuff like that. And, anyway, I mean, he's the president. He's an interesting figure. It's probably worth just taking a look at just so that you are kind of familiar with this guy, but don't expect to learn too much in the way of business or like knowledge. Cause, I just didn't find it that, what's the word? Illuminating,
intellectually exciting,
edifying.
Okay.
That was always a word that they liked in church.
Oh yeah.
let's see.
Hmm.
This book is a bear, and it would probably be better to find like an abridged copy. But The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith is a staple of libertarian economic thought.
Hmm.
And that's definitely, a classic that everybody should at least know the basics from.
Okay.
The most famous concept from it is the idea of the invisible hand.
Oh,
Right. Oh, so you've heard of that. So
I've heard of that. Yeah.
right. So he's who that idea comes from.
Okay.
And there's a quote that I've committed to memory from Adam Smith that I think is very good. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard to their own interest. And I think that explains sort of the libertarian way of thinking about economics in a big way.
Okay.
I've got some more, but you read some.
Well, there's another author who I've heard is excellent for, libertarians or just classic liberal way of thinking. That's John Stuart Mill.
Right. Yeah. Utilitarianism.
Yes. Yes. So I have a book here. It's the Basic Writings of John Stuart Mill, and it's on liberty, the subjection of women, and utilitarianism. So it's all three of those in one book, and I'm planning on reading that whole thing.
John Stuart Mill
it's not very long.
Is definitely like a big name to understand if you're into political philosophy. We should know him. We should know John Locke.
Yes.
We should know Thomas Hobbes. Even things where we disagree, right? And John Stuart Mill has plenty to disagree with. Utilitarianism has plenty to disagree with. Yeah. But there's a lot of good stuff there too. And again, we should know our enemy, right?
Yeah. Well,
not
that
he's 100% our enemy, but
Yeah. The Communist Manifesto.
Right. That's a
by
big
Karl Marx. Read that. It's short.
Yeah,
it's really short. But currently in the United States, a big idea that people are advocating is democratic socialism.
Yeah.
And they're saying, no, it's not going to be like the Soviet Union. It's not going to be like China. It's not going to be like Nazi Germany, even though it's the opposite of Nazi Germany, but whatever. But no, if you take Wikipedia with a grain of salt, because anybody can go on there and edit stuff. But if you look at the Wikipedia page for democratic socialism, look how many times they mention the name Marx. Karl Marx is all over it. The ideas of democratic socialism, they come from Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto author. He wrote that for the Soviet Union, for their Communist Party. That's where Leninism and Stalinism came from. It's from Karl Marx. So democratic socialism, its roots are with Karl Marx and communism. So read the Communist Manifesto at the very least.
Yeah. Bernie Sanders, I dare say, is basically a communist. And it is, definitely something to be concerned about and to know your shit when you're talking to people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you say, it's not very long.
No, it's not. But it's like a booklet, and it's just, here's this. Here's what we should do, what we shouldn't do. A few other books. I've read Crime and Punishment.
Right.
And that was, I'll go into, why I picked that one first. But I've read Crime and Punishment. We can talk about that one. And I've learned a little bit more about it, which I'll tell you about later. And another one I'm going to read of Dostoevsky's is The Brothers... Damn it, I'm going to mispronounce it again. The Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah, I don't think that's quite right. But yeah, Peterson,
I tried.
I know. Peterson talks about that book all the time.
Yes, he does. He loves Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've read Crime and Punishment, and I'm going to read The Brothers Karamazov.
Maybe we should also read the Gulag Archipelago by
I have books 2 and 3. I don't want to.
Are they huge? Are they like
They are
really...
huge.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
There's 3 books. Each one is huge. And I read somewhere online that it may not even be historically accurate. Like, it might be fiction. And I'm not sure if it's a fictional story based on true events. I'm not sure. But it's huge, and I'd rather read shorter books that are still informative about other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I might get to the Gulag Archipelago later, but
Right. Maybe there's an abridged.
Maybe. Although I think that author wrote another book. He wrote another one. It's for sure fiction, but it covers the same. I think it covers the same time period. It's still Soviet Russia. So I'm gonna look that up, and I'm gonna add that to my list. Yeah. Let's see. Another book I'm gonna read is Animal Farm.
I read that one in high school. That's quite good.
Yeah, I didn't have to read it in high school. Our teacher, chose to read other books, and so I've never read it, but I want to because it's still relevant today.
It actually wasn't assigned to me. I still read it.
Oh, nice. Good job.
Yeah, I think for a kid especially, like Animal Farm's a little easier to get into. Because it is a fiction, and the characters are all animals, and that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what it represents is, it's pretty clear what it represents, right? So it's not too hard. 1984 is another good George Orwell.
Yes, I recently reread that. I read it in high school. That's one of the few books from high school that really stuck with me. Was 1984, I reread it just a few months ago.
Yeah, that one's excellent, and it's a little bit freaky too. One of my students asked me, like, she's like, I'm going on a trip. What's one book that I should read, that I should know? And I said, and I thought about it, and that was actually the one I recommended, was 1984. I said, start here. One book that really influenced me, and compared to some of these like intellectual books that we're talking about, it's going to seem very lowbrow. But it was a big influence on me. It really did help me to look in the mirror and go, I'm an atheist. And that book is God No by Penn Jillette. And Penn was a huge influence on me. I know he's largely writing the book for some cash and for the lulz. But, I actually really liked it. And it was a big, like I said, it's a big influence. So, and that was not very long. God No.
N-O?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, by Penn Jillette. I think the subtitle is Signs You May Already Be an Atheist. And I was like, oh shit, I'm an atheist.
Nice.
Let's see. Another classic book that libertarians should know is The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. Socialism by Ludwig von Mises.
I've heard of him.
And America's Great Depression by Murray Rothbard. That one's for the ANCAPs.
Is that talking about the depression of the 30s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. America's Great Depression. Talking about where it comes from. Because when you go to school and they, you ask, what started the Great Depression? Basically they say it's like unbridled capitalism, right? And then socialism saved the day, right? So we're going to talk about how that's bullshit.
Okay.
So,
there's a book that I bought just recently and I started reading. It's more about the communism. It's called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. A Study of Brainwashing in China.
Interesting.
Yep. It's by Robert J. Lifton. And this book is, he went to China, he interviewed people who had been prisoners in there during the 1960s and 70s. That's the Chinese Cultural Revolution, when the communists took over. And so this very much is about what they did psychologically. In fact, this book, from what I've read so far, I'm in chapter 2, it very much, it is 1984's prison scene where the main character, they've captured him, he's in prison. The way they treated him, that is exactly what they did to people in China. Like, it is eerily similar. Yeah, so fascinating. The psychology of totalism, study of brainwashing in China.
I think if you're going to be critical of religion, you need to understand how brainwashing works. And
yes.
And it's the same thing for the religion of the state, right? You know, and I was happy when I was reading God is Not Great. You know, Hitchens was addressing the idea that the horrible dictators of the 20th century, like Hitler and Stalin, did their horrible things because they were atheists, right? Like they're both like atheist movements. But he points out, and I've said this before, and so it felt good to hear someone smart say it, you know, which is just like, you know, the state, you know, becomes the new religion. It becomes the new God, right? Yeah. And then you're still doing religious thinking, even though you're not directly associated with a God figure or religious figure. I mean, but I mean, Hitler was referred to as God at times. Stalin was. You know, if you look at North Korea, you can see it right now. The Uns are worshipped as gods.
Yeah. So. Yep. And Mao Zedong was as well in China. That reminded me of an article that I read recently. It was from the Libertarian Atheist page. Somebody linked it. But it was an article specifically about atheism in the Soviet Union and how it was in the name of atheism that these people did a lot of these things. Right. And it was a fascinating read, and I think that's where Jordan Peterson gets his idea from, of what an atheist is.
Right.
He thinks that an atheist is what the Soviets did, and what the Soviets did in the name of atheism, and what they called atheists. So he's wrong, because the Soviets were wrong. But that's where he gets his idea of what an atheist is, a true atheist. To him, a true atheist is a Soviet atheist. Mm-hmm. So I'll probably cover that article in one of our podcast episodes, because it was a different way of looking at things, and we in America, we know so little about Soviet communism, about Soviet Russia. We know so little about it. I believe it was Solzhenitsyn, the guy who did the Gulag Archipelago. I think he was one of the first ones to actually show the West, like, hey, this is Soviet Russia. This is what it's like to live under socialism, under, communist ideals. This is what it's like. It is hell. Yeah. Wake up, And so, so I think he was one of the first ones to help the West see, like, hey, Soviet, this is not something you want to idolize. This isn't something you want to achieve by any means. But this article talked about atheism and how, contrary to what Richard Dawkins said, atheism is dangerous if you look at it the way the Soviets framed it.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a good topic for a show.
It does. I'll link the article to you so you can read it yourself. Yeah,
right.
I found it fascinating.
Yeah, there's a difference between saying I'm an atheist and being able to actually stop thinking religiously. Yeah. Right? When you can break your own brainwashing.
Yes.
When you can cut that cord and you can start using logic to think. It's it could be a scary world, but there's beauty in truth, right?
And the more you learn about what the world is actually like, the more you can handle it.
And I think one of the things that theists will say is, and I hear this pretty much all the time, is like, can you really say that you're happy? Like you seem so unhappy. It's like, first of all, I'm not unhappy. I'm just thinking about shit. I got something on my mind. I make the angry face when I think. But like, but no, I'm actually, there's a lot of freedom. And for me, freedom and happiness pretty much go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Because, come what may, if you're in charge of your own destiny, to me, that's what it's about.
Yeah. Well, I believe the happiness that religious people have, a lot of that comes from the idea that we know what it's all about. We know that God's in charge, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to work out for the best. We know what happens even though they don't really know, they just have a strong belief. But we know what happens when we die.
Right.
We know that if we live a good life, it doesn't matter what, the world hands to us, what circumstances we're born in. If we live a good, honest life, we'll be in heaven. It'll be okay. It's a happily ever after.
Right.
There's a lot of comfort that comes from believing that what's going to happen.
Right.
You know things. And so, yeah, when you stop believing your religion, when you become an atheist, you're hit with the reality that, holy crap, I don't know. Nobody knows. They just say they do. No one actually knows what happens when we die, if anything. And so for a while, yeah, you might be unhappy because you're hit with all these realizations that you don't know. There are question marks everywhere. And part of the healing process is learning to focus on what you want to know more about. For me, it was through the God delusion. It was a desire to learn more about science. I no longer know anything that I used to know under religion as far as how the world works, when things were created, how they were created, all that kind of stuff. Science might have a lot of these answers. And so I want to find out what science has figured out.
Right.
That religion either attempts to answer or doesn't even bother to answer. The cliche answer is, if it doesn't affect your salvation, don't worry about it. Or, you'll have the answers in the afterlife. God will explain everything in a way we can understand. It'll all make sense then,
And yet Nephi says the truth is plain and precious.
Yes.
So
yeah, and easy to understand.
Right. Because if there is this, great truth that the whole world should know in order to be saved, then that knowledge should probably be fairly accessible.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
The truth should be soccer, not hockey. Right. And what do I mean by that? It's, if you are playing hockey, you have to have access to somewhere where it's cold enough to play it. And then you have to make a large investment into the equipment needed to play the game. Soccer is played all over the world because you need a ball. Mm-hmm. And that is the end of the list. Right. And there's more you could do to it to make it better. But ultimately, do you have a field? Do you have a ball? You can play.
Yeah.
So there's that accessibility.
Yeah.
So, if our salvation is based upon, knowledge, then we should be able to get it.
Yes. Yeah. And, science is not a bad thing. It's not something to avoid. You should embrace it. Really. Even if it means that through science, you realize that religion not only doesn't have the answers it claims to have, but it's often misinformation. So, you have to get to the point where truth matters more to you than bliss.
Yes.
It matters more to you than good, happy feelings. Because sometimes the truth is very hard to hear. It's hard to digest. It's not easy. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's very difficult. But the truth has to matter more than happiness and joy, and everything will work out in the end.
It's the red pill, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You
from
know,
the Matrix.
do you want to enter the horrible world of truth, or do you want to, enjoy your steak that's not real, and all that stuff.
And a lot of people aren't ready for that. And, you can't push somebody in that direction. You can, but it'll often backfire. They'll double down on their faith, their belief. They'll hold on to their, their religion.
Yeah.
But some people aren't ready yet to embrace the truth. And some people will never be. That's the way they want to live their life.
That's so true, though, because like I've heard so many people say, I looked at the God Delusion, or I watched Richard Dawkins talk, or any of this stuff, and it just strengthened my faith. Like I was just more sure by the time he was done that God was real, and it's just that backfire effect, like you say.
Yeah.
We clutch harder, we rationalize harder. And then any little perceived mistake is just evidence that we're right.
Yeah.
So anyway, last couple of books on my list. I did read End the Fed by Ron Paul. Ron Paul was a big reason why we turned to libertarianism.
Right.
So either that book or something else that he wrote.
What was this book called?
End the Fed.
End the Fed? The Federal Reserve?
Yeah, the Federal Reserve. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Nice.
And then on the other side of the universe, I recently finished Beyond Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm. That's someone else that Jordan Peterson really likes and he recommends.
Right. I'm not sure why he likes them, but,
really?
Now that I've read both, but, but I'm sure there's some stuff there. I mean, I think if you're just going to get into psychology and philosophy, you need to know who Nietzsche is.
Yes.
So, but maybe we'll save that one down the line because that's pretty heavy.
Okay.
So, okay. Any last book ideas from you?
Not from me. I'm sure some will come up, but we can list those in another episode.
If you guys have
what I've got for now.
Yeah. If you guys have book ideas, hit us up on Facebook and on Twitter. Or if you want to vote for something that we've said, maybe we'll set up a little poll or something, at least on the Facebook page. That's pretty easy to do. And then we can decide what we want to do after the God Delusion.
Yeah.
Okay? But the God Delusion is definitely first.
Yep.
So, what are those places where they can find us, Lisa?
Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Well, folks, until next week, stay free.
And stay skeptical.